Is there a best way to learn a language? Some people seem to think so. They feel strongly that the method they use is the best. It's the best not just for them, but for everyone in all circumstances. They'll get into arguments with people who follow another method than their own. If that person is equally convinced that their way is the best, things can sometimes get kinda heated. For someone like me, engaging with those people can feel pretty awkward. It's like when Jehovah's Witnesses knock at your door and they're being a little too insistent about what they're selling. Or that friend that keeps yapping about how great some movie is, and they just really want you to agree with them. You want to extricate yourself from the situation, but you also don't want to be a jerk about it. So you go for the old agree to disagree method. You say something like, I'm happy that you like it and that it works for you, but I'm not sure there's one best method out there to learn a language. The other day I was reading an old paper by the late N.S. Prabhu entitled, There is no best method. Why? He describes saying there is no best method, like this, quote, it seeks to terminate a debate without reaching any substantive conclusion, and it does so not by admitting defeat in the effort to reach a conclusion, but by appearing to raise the debate itself to a higher level, thus helping to save face all round. It suggests not just that proponents of different methods agree to disagree, but that they give up their pursuit of agreement and disagreement as being unproductive. It manages to reconcile conflicting views by defining a position to which all can honorably subscribe, and by striking a philosophical note on which enlightened discussion can properly end. It is thus a convenient device for legitimizing non-resolution of methodological issues. I don't feel called out. What do you mean? But yeah, he's right on the money. Sometimes I'm just trying to politely end the conversation. There also might be a little bit of virtue signaling involved, like, there is no best method. Look how pluralistic and virtuous I'm being. I'm sure there are people who genuinely live up to that belief. If someone told them they were learning a language with a given method, no matter what that method was, they wouldn't have any opinion about it. Unfortunately, that's not me. Sometimes I do have an opinion about it. I might even think their way of learning is actually pretty bad. But I might still fall back on the no best method line as a polite way to get out of the conversation. But as Prabhu goes on to describe, if you probe people like me when we say that kind of thing, usually you'll find that it's not an empty statement. It's not just a convenient way to end a conversation. There's actually some substance behind it. In my case, I think the substance basically boils down to two things. When I say there's no best method, the first point I'm making is, it depends. What works for one person may not work for another. A bunch of different factors might influence which method is best for a given person. Linguistic and cultural factors, economic factors, time constraints, your goals, age, motivation, personal preferences, cognitive profile, whether or not you have prior experience learning a foreign language, and so on. That being the case, I just don't believe there's any such thing as a one-size-fits-all method that would work best for everyone all of the time. But to quote Prabhu again, quote, notice, however, that to say that no single method is best for everyone is also to say that different methods are best for different people or for different contexts. This implies that for any single context, there is in fact a method that is best, and further, we are able to determine what it is. That sounds about right. When I say there's no best method, I don't mean there isn't one for me in my particular set of circumstances. I just mean that whatever that method is, it's going to depend on what those circumstances are. You can absolutely come up to me and tell me, oh, you'd get better results if you tried doing this. But you need to take my circumstances into account. You can't just ignore all of that and assume that what worked for you is necessarily going to work for me. I think part of why I butt heads with people like that is because, well, if I want to figure out what the best method is for me, I'm going to need to be pragmatic about it. I'm going to need some trial and error to see what works and what doesn't. To do that, I need to be flexible, and that flexibility collides with the rigid and inflexible belief that there is really only one way to do this. What I've found is that quite often this kind of orthodox belief that there's just one single best method, that belief is often rooted in another belief about the underlying biological mechanisms involved in language acquisition. Basically, they're saying, This is how language acquisition works, biologically, therefore, this method is the best one. For example, one person might say that if you're an adult learning a foreign language, you have to study grammar explicitly. Why? Because there's a critical period, and after a certain age, you can no longer pick up grammar implicitly the way children do. It's biology, there's nothing you can do about it. Conversely, someone might say that you should not study grammar explicitly. Why? Because there's no such thing as a biological critical period for language acquisition. You actually can learn the same way young children do. And if you don't, you're just gonna mess things up and end up with worse results than if you just learned, quote unquote, like a baby. The problem is that all of that is still one big open question. It's a bit dated, but back in 2005, the journal Science celebrated its 125th anniversary by publishing a list of the top 125 unanswered questions in all sciences combined. One of those questions was, why are there critical periods for language learning? We know they exist in the sense that if you measure certain language learning outcomes, there's a statistical drop-off point at a certain age. But why is there that statistical drop-off? Is it because of biology? Or is it maybe because of social or cultural factors? There's no clear answer to that yet. And that leads to the second point I'm making when I say there's no best method. And that is, hold your beliefs lightly. Otherwise, you might end up getting ahead of yourself and believing you have the answer to what science just isn't able to answer yet. It's already kind of a shame just in terms of how we approach science. If you go in believing that a given conclusion has to be true, you might just look for the bits and pieces that confirm what you already believe and overlook all the other stuff that conflicts with what you believe. To me, that's kind of myopic. Some of those questions, like why is there a critical period, those are really interesting questions in their own right. It's a shame to not engage with those questions seriously just because the answer might not line up with what we want to believe. But it's also a shame because it can have some negative consequences on how we learn languages. Like, if you believe this particular approach is the best because of biology, but you've been at it for ages and it's just not working for you, either at all or just not as well as you had hoped, are you just going to keep bashing your head against the wall? Some people do just that. Personally, I figure that if that happens, then maybe at some point it's better to just drop those beliefs and be more pragmatic about it, so you can tweak your approach to make it work better for you, even if those adjustments conflict with your beliefs about how language acquisition works. If you landed on this video, chances are you're a self-learner. One of the great things about being a self-learner is that you're free from all the constraints that come from being in a formal education setting. I mean, institutions like schools have a whole bunch of contextual factors they have to take into account. They have to be able to meet testing standards set by local or national authorities. They have to deal with group classes with a bunch of different learners, many of whom don't want to be there in the first place. And good luck getting them to learn anything if they don't want to. If you're looking for the best method for a high school Spanish class or something like that, you're going to have a lot fewer options than if you're looking for the best method just for you as an individual. And I'm finally done with formal education and I get to choose for myself how I'm going to learn. I'm not going to switch from one set of strict, rigid rules to another set of strict, rigid rules. I'd rather enjoy the freedom I get from being a self-learner, and little by little, through trial and error, I'll figure out which is the best method for me. So, for me at least, saying there's no best method isn't just about shutting down unpleasant conversation. It's about being more pragmatic and allowing yourself to try out different things, see which ones work for you and which ones don't, and allowing yourself to get comfortable with the unknown. To not feel like you have to have the answers to everything, especially when the science just isn't there yet.